justice all along while we have, and been fighting alongside and helping law enforcement. And so he's been alongside of us and has the same mission that we do. And so with that, and without further ado, Nathan Hochman.
Well, Jody, thank you so much for opening up your house and your, where's your husband? Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. So, wow, that was I wish my mom was here to hear that. That was fantastic. And I love the concept of a long-sider. I hadn't heard that before. And I'm going to work with that. That's excellent. So what I'd like to do is introduce myself, sort of tell you what I believe the DA's role should be. And you're going to find out it's in contrast to what George Gascon thinks that role should be. I'll describe a few things about what I'd like to do if I actually became DA, and I'm going to answer the question how I'm going to beat George Gascon. So let me start out by saying some overall principles. I will not be having as a chief of staff someone who is not a prosecutor. Let's start with that. Yeah. Someone who would wear a shirt and publicly say the police are trained to kill us, and put on their social media that the police are barbarians and an occupying army. I won't bring in someone from the Deputy Public Defender's Office who eventually gets charged with 11 felony counts. I'm sure you thought I might, and I just want to rest assured that this will not be happening. And you won't see me elevating people who have absolutely no experience into roles in which experience actually counts and matters. So let me give you my background. Lifelong Angelino. Born here, grew up here. I'm married 31 years in LA. I've raised 3 kids, and they're now in their 20s. I then had the opportunity to go to Brown University, Stanford Law School, came back to LA, clerked for a federal judge, went right to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Now I know it's not the DA's office, okay? In fact, the same month I started the U.S. Attorney's Office, one of my classmates from high school, Steve Katz, started the DA's office. You know, I left, he's still there, and he's been doing incredible work. But I had the chance for 7 years to do the whole range of cases. So I personally prosecuted narcotics traffickers, violent gang members, international money launderers. I ran the environmental crime section, went after air, sea, and land polluters. I was part of the government fraud and public corruption section as well. Did every type of fraud imaginable involving a government program, and went after corrupt public officials, and was part of the team that actually brought down 16 deputy sheriffs who were stealing drugs, guns, and money from drug dealers back in the 1990s. 10 years after that, I had the opportunity to get a presidential appointment, a unanimous Senate confirmation. Got to go back to Washington, D.C., run the U.S. Department of Justice's tax division. It was a great job. In fact, my wife had the 3 little kids at the time here in L.A., and I would go back and forth. The joke was that she had the real job, and I had the fantasy job. Like a guy in his 40s got to go to fantasy job camp, and that was a fantastic job. Because again, a $100 million budget, 350 is some of the most talented lawyers in the world doing cases all over the nation. In fact, to give you an idea how I approached that job, which is in part how I would approach this job, I asked the guys, I come into the office, and again, I'm from California, going into a DC office. I have a tax background, I've been in a tax firm, I've been a prosecutor, but I wasn't a tax division guy. And they're kind of particular. And those are people there who are there for 10, 20, and 30 years. So they kind of had a little suspicion on whether or not I knew anything about what I was going to be in charge of. So I said to them, I said, what are the best cases the tax division has right this second? And they said, okay, we're doing $1 billion tax case against Chevron. So I had them tell me what the issue is. I kind of fell asleep in the middle of the discussion. It was super complicated. I get it. It was $1 billion, but yeah, it was really complicated. I said, what else you got? He says, well, we're going after Wesley Snipes in Florida. I said, sign me up. So sure enough, I went down to Ocala, Florida, a small little courtroom. There is Wesley Snipes on trial for being a tax evader. He didn't file returns. He didn't pay $38 million in taxes. And I'm watching it play out in a small courtroom in Ocala, Florida, and I'm realizing that the Florida U.S. attorney, who's the lead, has no idea how to prosecute a celebrity. Because if you're from LA, you've seen how celebrities can be successfully and unsuccessfully prosecuted. And I'm watching Wesley Snipes. He's not testifying. But he's testifying. Because he sits there very politely. The paparazzi are outside the courtroom going, this is going the wrong way. So what the jury ends up doing is splitting the verdict. They acquit him all the tax evasion. They convict him of not filing a tax return. It's a misdemeanor. But what we knew is that judge, who I was watching the whole time, he wasn't putting up with any of this. So misdemeanors, as you know, can stack, and so 3 misdemeanors is 3 years of federal time, and you do 85% of federal time. There is no parole in the federal system. So I actually then get involved and actually give the sentencing argument myself, coming in from Washington, D.C., and I make the whole point that if you allow a tax protester like Wesley Snipes to get probation, it's going to erupt tax protesting around the United States of America. So sure enough, that judge listens to Wesley. He brought in Woody Harrelson. He brought in, I mean, this was a celebrity type, in small little courtroom in Florida. We had the whole, character witnesses. And at the end, the judge said, Mr. Snipes and your counsel, are you done? Yeah. All right. What's the maximum I can get? That's when you know it's going well. So, 3 years, Your Honor. He says 3 years, 3 years. All right, 3 years. Bangs the gavel, leaves the edge. And the point is that I made it a point to learn those cases, could do those cases, could back up the troops, and that was the message to everyone. And so within basically 2 weeks, I went around and met 350 attorneys who I hadn't met before. Went in their offices, had them come to mine, explained to them, figured out what they did, because my philosophy of leading, whether it's in the tax division or if I'm lucky enough to be the DA's office, is that my job is to elevate you folks in your job. It really is that simple. Because if you succeed, I'll succeed. But more importantly, if you succeed, justice is going to get done here in LA County. Victims are going to have their cases brought and successfully, tried, and whatever justice you can bring someone who's been victimized, you will be able to do it. And that is the role of the DA. George Gascon doesn't get that. I don't know if he's afraid of you folks because he's never personally prosecuted or defended a case in his whole life. I don't know exactly what it is, but I view you as having literally thousands of years of collective experience that I have to benefit from. I need to benefit from. I'd be foolish to disregard what I consider the greatest asset in the DA's office. Because if you think about it, it's not your buildings. This is not a real estate play. It's not the computers. It's not the toner. It's not even your cases. It's the people who are actually doing those cases. You are the resource. My job, as anybody in charge of any business would also know, is to maximize the greatest asset of the office, which are the prosecutors, the investigators, the staff, and then the law enforcement, a community that you have to work with. That's smart management 101. And George Gascon simply doesn't get that. And I was, in some ways, as a citizen of LA, I know he came in the first hour, special directives, he's not asking a soul, but you would hope he would learn that when things aren't working, when 98% of you folks vote to support his recall, that he would take that as a message that things aren't working and pivot. But again, his elevating Diana Turan and Tiffany Blacknell in January of 2024 is the signal that no, he's not going to learn, he's not going to pivot. He doesn't particularly respect or want to understand what it is you guys are doing and what your thoughts are on how to do it better. And that will be the opposite of how I will treat the people, the greatest asset in the office. Because here's what you will never hear from me. When George Gascon is asked to explain, why do 2/3 of the people in Los Angeles feel less safe today than they did when you came into office? His explanation is, well, LA is no worse than, and then he fills in the blank. Miami, Houston, Dallas, Boston, Philadelphia, whatever. You will never hear these words from me, because no worse than is not my standard. My standard is very simple. It is the best. It is the gold standard. It is what the LA... let me pass the applause back on to you, because the LADA's office used to be the gold standard by which all other offices were measured, state and even nationally. That will be the standard again. I mean, and it'll be whether you're the best or you're always striving to be the best, that will be the standard. And if it means that, you know, that we have to invest in the resources to build it up, I mean, you folks are hemorrhaging lawyers. I mean, every time, and it's a really bad spiral, by the way, because you're losing the wrong people. Not that there's right people to lose, but if you had to, you know, lose a person, you don't want to lose someone with 20 years experience, 10 years experience, 5 years, 15 years experience, because you can't replace them with someone who just, you're just training and has 1 or 2 years experience. It just doesn't work. And again, as the more people are leaving and the environment becomes more and more toxic, then you're going to keep losing those people, and you can't replace them fast enough. And then if the environment's toxic, who wants to work for the LADA's office? I hate to say it. You know, I've been talking to Mike Hestron down in Riverside, Jason Anderson in San Bernardino, Todd Spitzer in Orange County, or even Summer Steffen down in San Diego. They're happy. Why are they happy? Because they've been getting lawyers coming down to those offices, the quality of which they haven't really seen as much, because those folks used to come to LA. Now they're going to, they want to be DAs, but they don't want to be it in LA, and they're going down to their offices. I mean, it's gotten so bad that Todd Spitzer put those billboards up to alert criminals that laws get actually enforced in Orange County, which I thought was kind of a bold, in-your-face move. I mean, he's not a fan of George Gascon, obviously. And I said to Todd, Todd, did you get a long-term lease on those billboards? I'm hoping after November 5th we can take them down. And so when I've had a chance to then reach out, and not just to deputy district attorneys, I've done the reach out to law enforcement, because the rest of my resume is, when I got back from Washington, D.C., I went ahead and headed up 2 major international law firms' government investigations practice. So effectively that means I spent 10 years as a prosecutor doing about 100 cases. Now I had 33 trials, and I know you guys knocked that out in a month. That's a lot in the federal practice. I've had about 12 on the defense side, because I then spent over 20 years on the defense side. And so I would be the first district attorney ever that's been both a prosecutor and a defense lawyer. I'll be the first district attorney who, not only one of the things I did in 2020 during the Defund the Police movement with my brother, is set up the LA Sheriff's Foundation. We've actually raised them over $1 million. I've met with hundreds of deputy sheriffs all the way up to the sheriff himself, and we've gotten them needed equipment in probably 18 of their stations. So I'll be the only person who's actually been the co-founder of a Sheriff's Foundation, and the only DA that's ever prosecuted a deputy sheriff. So it gives me street credibility in different worlds, the defense world and the prosecution world, working with law enforcement, but them understanding that if a law enforcement officer crosses the line, I'm not going to hesitate to treat them as a criminal if they've engaged in criminal actions. And that's what I tell. This is part of the society that has suspicions about law enforcement officers. Gascon's never done it. In fact, he has no idea how to prosecute a police officer, ever. I mean, it's indicative in some of the cases he's chosen to even bring against police officers. And so I tell that community, I tell right to their face, I've met with, folks that are representatives of that community. I said, I actually could bring the case myself if I ever had to, but I certainly can understand winning cases and what they look like, and if they need to be brought, they will be brought. In my discussions directly with Sheriff Luna and with Michael Moore before, now Dominic Troy, is the same thing. And they tell me that there's no one that hates a bad cop more than a good cop. And enough said. So again, I will be able to hopefully not only restore relations with the district attorney's office, set up the gold standard, have you folks, and here's the only thing I will demand, is however hard you have ever worked in the DA's office, I'm going to demand a little bit more. I'm going to demand you to be your best possible selves. Let me know what you need from the DA to make that happen, and that's my job. My job is to see if I can make that happen. And once you set that as your standard, then I transfer that over to law enforcement. And I say, look, law enforcement, you're having trouble recruiting. You're losing great people. You can't, I mean, the LA Sheriff's Department is down 1,200 lawyers. LAPD is down at least 1,200, if not more. Local police departments are also down. You need a DA's office that's going to do its job, because you folks want to do your job and you've been prevented. Now we're going to say, okay, the DA's back in business. We're going to do our job. Now, law enforcement, I need you to do your job better than you've ever done. And once people see from the outside that this is now hopefully the new culture we're going to bring, they're going to want to be part of the LA DA's office. They just will. I'm absolutely convinced. You know, and it's been, whether I've worked in the tax division or major international law firms, it's the same philosophy. It literally is management 101. And we just need to put those principles in place in the DA's office and create, again, the gold standard. So let me spend just a few moments on how I'm going to beat George Gascon. So one of the reasons that I'm standing here and nobody else, and no other opponent of George Gascon is standing here, is that not only do I have an idea on how to orient an office and project these ideas to the public, and by the way, when you hear these ideas being projected to the public, one of the things I most emphasize is that I reject blanket extreme policies. Because you're going to hear, what you'll hear from George Gascon is that I want to reinstitute mass incarceration policies in the 1990s. And I'm sure he's going to run commercials saying that's what I want to do. I reject. I was part of, in the federal government in the 90s, mass incarceration policies, they failed. George Gascon decided to go the other end of the pendulum swing and institute decarceration, extreme blanket policies. They failed. So what you will see from me is we're going to get rid of blanket policies. We're going to go back to what I call the hard middle. And the only reason I use the word hard to project that, I don't have to tell you it's hard. You get it. Outside people need to understand it's actually hard, because you got to look at each individual case on a case-by-case analysis. You look at the defendant's background and the relevant factors. You look at the crime committed. You look at the impact on the victim to determine who the true threats are to our public safety and need to be behind bars, and quite candidly, the ones that aren't. You know, your first-time nonviolent offender, that still has to pay their debt if they committed a crime to society. But that debt can be paid through community service, diversion programs, and whether it's Jackie Lacey, Steve Cooley, or anybody else who's instituted these programs, if they're working and we can get people in them and then keep those people out of the criminal justice system, it's not lost on me that it's $128,000 to incarcerate someone for a year. It's often a lot less to incarcerate, to give them a skill set while they're in prison or keep them out of prison to begin with. So part of what I'm also pitching out there to the world is that the DA's office needs to have, and we're sharing, we're looking for a good title for it, but I'll just describe it. I call it a before, during, and after approach. So here's what it looks like. Before, to the extent we can get out in the community, and the community I'm targeting are elementary, middle, and high school students and their parents. Because these are the folks who have not entered the system yet, and they have they either have a fear of the system or they have myths about the system, and all of you folks, that you're out there just trying to put everybody in jail and that's all you care about. Not justice, but putting people in jail. If we can get both the whole people from the DA's office and law enforcement out. We have the project lead. The idea would be to scale that up massively. And quite candidly, this would be something that would be more on, it would certainly be a DA program, but no one's going to force anybody into it. My fervent belief is that we can create a great program, everyone's going to want to participate. Absolutely. So that's the before component. The during is accountability. At whatever proportional level, we now start to hold people accountable. So you will not see juveniles think that they can steal just under $950 or commit a whole raft of other crimes and not have accountability imposed. The enhancements will be back in play. And again, we're not going to swing to the mass incarceration level, but everything is now back for consideration the way it should be. The after is actually important too. The DA has a role in rehabilitation. Now, the rule, I don't actually in charge of rehabilitation programs, but I can scream pretty loudly with a huge megaphone to tell the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation that you actually have to do your job. So one of the programs that I support is called the Last Mile. What does the Last Mile do? It teaches coding skills to prisoners. And it has been enormously successful. In fact, when it first started, I met with the guy who founded the program. He said when they went to San Quentin to begin with, there was huge suspicions on whether or not prisoners actually would want the program, could do the program, or could succeed in the program. Turns out there's a waiting list for the program. Turns out they're absolutely more than capable of learning coding skills to do website maintenance and stuff like that. And the third part is that if they could get them in the program, graduate them, they've graduated hundreds of people, help them get their first job, which is a good paying job. It's like $50,000 to $70,000. The recidivism rate, which in LA County is over 50%, for the Last Mile it's less than 1%. And that's the point. $6,000 investment, you now have someone who's actually a tax-paying individual supporting their family. And the criminal justice system, including us, helps provide the rule to make society, well, not only more just, but more safe. So, that would be what we're going to do. And so this is now the message I am conveying out to the general public. And guess what? It's resonating. George Gascon turns out to be the most unpopular politician in all of Los Angeles County, which is impressive. His numbers are actually worse than Kevin De Leon. When I saw that, I was going like, wow, this guy is incredibly beatable, as evidenced by the fact that he only got 25% of the vote in the primary, meaning 75% of the people rejected him. And by the way, no DA seeking re-election had ever gotten such a low number of 25%. In fact, no DA who's ever gotten under 37% has ever won the general election. So my job is to unify that whole 75%. And who's it made up of? Democrats, independents, Republicans, every demographic you can think of, black, white, Asian, Latino, every religion, every part of the county, from here in Long Beach to LA up to Lancaster, from Santa Monica to the San Gabriel, Santa Clarita, and San Fernando valleys. Literally, if you look at the electoral map and you just plotted, anybody who voted against Gascon, the whole thing is covered. It was great. Sensational. Thank you, George. And its recent controversies. You hate to. Again, we plan against the best. Where our game plan is always believing that George Gascon is going to do everything correct, and he's going to bring in millions of dollars from George Soros and the progressive left. And so we are plotting against the best campaign he can possibly run. But he's not there. I must tell you, this is you plot against that one, and then you watch the mistakes he is making over and over and over again. And thank you. I never thought I would say this out loud, but I'm going to say it. Thank you, Rob Bonta. I really appreciate it. Now, I don't know that. Who knows that those 11 felony counts are going to stick. The one thing I can tell you that gives me a little bit of hope is that I ran against Rob Bonta. I didn't say the nicest things about Rob Bonta. Rob Bonta supported George Gascon back in 2020. So if ever there was someone, if they're going to bring 11 felony counts and then issue a press release that says no one is above the law, and that's what Rob Bonta did, I would hope that's a pretty solid case. We'll see. We'll see what happens. But in the meantime, it's an interesting development. It just sort of highlights, if not his policies, his incompetence. Because the one thing I'm absolutely sure of is that George Gascon knew that Diana Taran was in the middle of an attorney general's criminal investigation when he put her in charge of ethics and integrity. Again, you can't make this stuff up. It's just, I call it catastrophic incompetence as far as managing an office. And that violates management. We already violated management rule 101. We're like into the 120 series by now. It's just pretty shocking. So, but what I've been able to do is unify. My target audience recently has been Democrats, and I'll tell you why. When George Gascon, on election night, he knew he was going to run against me. He didn't say I'm going to run on my experience, which most DAs would tout to the public as a reason why they should vote for them over the challenger, because he has 0 years and I have 34 years. He has 0 cases personally tried or defended. I have several hundred. He's not going to run on his record, because you folks know his record better than anybody. And that record is basically a record making our county less safe over the last 3.5 years and more safe. So he's going to say it's Democrats versus Republicans. And let me give you the response to that so you have it. I'll start with my personal political journey. 20 years as a Democrat, 20 years as a centrist Republican, and now I'm an independent running for a nonpartisan position where the ballot will not have party affiliation on it. And you actually want your DA to be independent. You want your DA and yourselves, by extension, to be resolving cases only on 2 things: the facts and the law. You do not want my personal political agenda to be a superseding factor that decides that there are just certain crimes and certain criminals we're not going to go after because I don't think so. That's my ideology. That needs to be divorced from these decisions, because these decisions are just too darn important in people's lives and the public's lives to insert my political ideology on top of it. So we've been making those points and to George Gascon. And then the other interesting point that we made about Democrats versus Republicans is that George Gascon was a Republican.
Huh?
He didn't become a Democrat until 2011. Which means he's been a Democrat for 13 years. I've been a Democrat for 20. So I've actually been a Democrat longer than he's been a Democrat. He's been a Republican for well over 30 years, and I was for 20. So he's been a Republican longer than I have. I've been a Democrat longer than he has. But this is supposedly for him, Democrats versus Republicans. And you might have seen some of the endorsements that I got recently. I've been endorsed by John McKinney and Maria Ramirez, obviously stalwarts of this office, and Democrats. I was endorsed very recently by Jackie Lacey, and she made the point that this really is not about politics. This is about who's going to keep people safe for the next 4 years and run the office in a competent manner. And then because of George Gascon's parole policy, or parole hearing policy, where he refuses to send prosecutors to parole hearings, I got a call right after the primary from 2 people you would not expect me to have gotten a call from, which was Max and Rory Kennedy. Max and Rory Kennedy are 2 of RFK's 11 children. RFK, if you'll remember, was assassinated by Sirhan Sirhan back in 1968 at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. They called me up. I said, great to speak with you. What's up? And they said, well, for 15 consecutive parole hearings, spanning almost 40 years, the DA's office had consistently sent a prosecutor with the Kennedy family to be there and represent them at the parole hearing of Sirhan Sirhan. But the 16th one in 2022, George Gascon failed to do that. It's part of his policy. Not surprisingly, or maybe there's a causal link, the parole board for the first time in 40 years granted parole. It actually took the governor to reverse that to keep Sirhan Sirhan behind bars. So the Kennedy family was incensed. And when they learned that it wasn't just them, and they had obviously the resources to contact the governor, but it affects hundreds of other families, they said, okay, we are going to do something we've never done before. And we're going to come out for someone running against a Democrat. And they did. Right in front of the Hall of Justice, George Gascon's office, waving above us, and they just said, George Gascon has failed the people of Los Angeles. And they got to know me, and they said, look, I know what Nathan Hochman's going to do. He's going to reinstitute and bring back that safety and that responsibility to victims in our society, which was fantastic. So the polling numbers that we have gotten post-election, you hate to fall in love with your original polling results, but they're great. They would show that I would beat George Gascon by 15 to 20 points if the election was tomorrow. But I tell my team, I say, well, Sharon, this is my team. I say, we are 15 to 20 points down. That's the way we approach it. So that we work hard every single day to get out to this huge community, to make sure this message is getting out, and it is doing very, very well. So let me stop there. Let me now turn to questions. ask any question you want. It can be harsh, it can be in my face, it can be like whatever you want. Then now is the time to ask it, and I'll do my best to answer it.